A woman living in her van spends her last $47 on a storage unit full of trash. Inside a locked trunk, buried beneath water-damaged boxes and broken furniture, she finds a dead woman's journal, a safe deposit key, and evidence of a crime that one of the most powerful families in Savannah has kept buried for 40 years. What happens next will take your breath away. If stories like this move, you take a moment now and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means we can keep bringing you these voices that deserve to be heard. Dawn arrived in Savannah the way it always did, slow and heavy, like something the city had to remember how to do each morning. Gray light filtered through Spanish moss that hung from the live oaks lining Drayton Street, dripping with last night's rain. The air smelled of wet earth and magnolia, and the faint diesel exhaust from delivery trucks already rumbling toward River Street. Inside a 2007 Dodge van parked behind Odom's Auto Repair, Corinne Bellamy folded a thin blanket over her sleeping son and listened to him breathe. There it was, that sound, a faint whistle at the end of each exhale, barely audible unless you knew to listen for it. Corinne always listened for it. She had trained her ear the way a musician trains for pitch, catching the slightest deviation from normal, measuring each breath against the one before it. Ezra was 10 years old. He had his father's wide-set eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw, and a pair of lungs that had been trying to betray him since he was 3. The blue rescue inhaler in his jacket pocket cost $14 with the discount card from the free clinic on Bull Street. Without the card, it cost $68. Corinne knew both numbers the way she knew her own heartbeat. She checked her watch, 6:12. Early enough to use the gas station restroom on Abercorn before the morning clerk arrived. The one who watched her like she was casing the place every time she walked in to wash her hands. Ezra. She touched his shoulder, gentle. Time to get up, baby. His eyes opened, and for a moment they held that unfocused softness of whatever dream he had been swimming in. Then they sharpened. Those eyes always sharpened fast. Too fast for a 10-year-old, as if sleep were a luxury he couldn't quite trust. Same dream again, Mom. The one with the house. She smoothed the hair from his forehead. Tell me about it. Big windows, bookshelves all the way to the ceiling, and a reading chair by the window where the sun comes in. Sounds perfect. One day, baby. He sat up and reached for his inhaler without being asked. 2 puffs. Hold for 10. Exhale. A ritual as practiced as a prayer performed twice every morning before his feet touched anything resembling ground. Their routine moved with the precision of people who had learned to make the world work in 400 square feet. Teeth brushed with bottled water over a plastic basin. Faces washed with a cloth wrung from the same basin. Clean shirts pulled from a Ziploc bag that Corinne kept sealed against the Savannah humidity. Breakfast was peanut butter on the last 4 slices of white bread and 2 apples that were going soft but hadn't turned yet. While Ezra ate, he opened the leather journal that lived in the passenger seat door pocket. It was Corinne's, filled with her careful handwriting. Pages and pages of notes from her years working as a housekeeper for the families in Ardsley Park and the Victorian district. Sterling silver marks and what they meant. How to tell Venetian glass from reproduction. The weight difference between solid brass and brass-plated zinc. How a hand-knotted Persian rug feels different underfoot from a machine-made copy. You wrote that Mrs. Carrington's tea set was worth $4,000. Ezra said, turning a page. How did you know Corinne started the van? The engine caught on the 3rd try. She made an appraiser come once when she was redecorating. I listened. She glanced at her son through the rearview mirror. That's how you learn the things people don't think you need to know. You just have to know where to look. Mrs. Odom was already outside wiping her hands on a shop rag when they pulled around front. She was a solid woman in her 60s, with forearms like a longshoreman and a voice that carried across 3 lanes of traffic. She nodded at Corinne the way she always did, with a respect that never slid into pity. "Morning, Mrs. Odom. Sleep okay back there?" "Yes, ma'am," Ezra answered for both of them, which made Mrs. Odom smile. "Got something for you." She reached into the pocket of her coveralls and produced a folded flyer, slightly oil-stained. "Storage auction today out at Valley View on Deren. Units abandoned 90-plus days. Thought of you since you've got that eye." Corinne took the flyer. 10 a.m. start, cash only. Win and clear within 48 hours. She had watched enough of those storage auction shows during better times, back when they had an apartment with a television, to understand how it worked. People bid on the unknown contents of abandoned units. Most of it was junk. Sometimes it wasn't. "Thank you," she said, and folded the flyer into her jacket pocket next to the brooch. The brooch was why they were driving to Whitaker Street first. She had found it 2 days ago in a donation bin behind Christ Church. Spotted it while searching for a winter coat for Ezra. Even though winter in Savannah was mild, it was Victorian, she was almost certain. Seed pearls, fine filigree metalwork. A pin mechanism that moved with the smooth resistance of quality craftsmanship. She had held it up to the light and felt that familiar tingle at the base of her skull, the one that told her she was looking at something real. Moreno's Pawn and Trade occupied a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a nail salon. Barred windows, a neon sign that buzzed and flickered in the morning heat. Inside it smelled of old leather and metal polish, and the display cases were arranged with the careful geometry of a man who respected his inventory. Abe Moreno looked up from behind the counter when the bell rang. He was in his late 50s, neat beard going silver. Reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His hands were the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime handling small, delicate things. "Good morning," Corinne said, and set the brooch on the counter between them, unwrapping it from its tissue paper with the steady fingers of a woman presenting evidence. Abe picked up his loupe, turned the piece slowly under the light. Corinne watched his eyebrows and said nothing. She had learned long ago that the first person to speak in a negotiation loses ground. Victorian, she offered after the silence had done its work. 1880s. The pearls are genuine though small. His eyebrows confirmed what she already knew. "You know jewelry. I know a little about a lot of things." He set down the loupe. "You're correct. Late Victorian, excellent condition. Silver setting, not platinum, which limits the value. But it's authentic, and the filigree is fine work. $60, 70, 65. Done." He counted out the bills with the efficient snap of a man who had counted out 10,000 sets of bills before this one. As he did, his gaze moved to Ezra, who stood quietly by a display case full of pocket watches, studying them with the focused attention of a boy reading a very good book. "Smart kid," Abe said. "Brilliant," Corinne answered, and the word carried no exaggeration. Abe reached beneath the counter and produced a wooden chess set battered at the corners. Its board folding in half to hold the magnetic pieces inside. He set it on the glass. "You play?" Ezra looked up. "Yes, sir. At the library, mostly." "Take it." Board folds flat. Pieces are magnetic, so they stay put. Previous owner forfeited it on a loan and never came back. Ezra looked at his mother. Corinne hesitated. She had learned to be cautious with generosity. It so often came with a price. I have 5 grandchildren in Miami, Abe said, reading her pause correctly. Games that make you think. Very important. Please, it gathers dust here. Corinne nodded, and Ezra took the chess set with both hands holding it like something sacred. Thank you, sir. Outside, the Savannah heat was already pressing down on the sidewalks, pulling steam from the puddles left by last night's rain. Ezra clutched his chess set and looked up at his mother. Can we go to the storage auction? Like on those TV shows? Corinne counted their money in her head. 65 from the brooch, 47 they already had, $112. Enough for a week of gas and food if they were careful, or enough for a gamble. It's a risk, Ezra. If we spend it and there's nothing worth having, we're in trouble. But you're good at seeing value. Better than those people on TV. You always say they miss the obvious stuff. She looked at her son, at the chess set in his hands, at the careful way he carried it, the way he carried everything, with the tenderness that broke her heart, because no 10-year-old should have to be that careful with the world. We'll see, she said. Valley View Storage sat on a sun-bleached lot off Duran Avenue behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire that glinted like bad intentions in the morning light. A cluster of pickup trucks and SUVs filled the gravel parking area. The people milling near the entrance were mostly men 30s and 40s, some carrying flashlights, others with smartphones, and the sharp-eyed look of professionals who did this every weekend. Corinne parked the van at the far end of the lot. She turned off the engine and sat there, hands on the wheel, suddenly aware of everything that separated her from the people walking toward that gate. They had trucks to haul their finds, cash to bid confidently, storage space to hold inventory. She had a van with a slow oil leak and a son who needed his inhaler refilled by Friday. Mom, Ezra's voice quiet and certain. You can do this. She looked at him. He looked back at her with those sharp eyes, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not courage exactly, something more stubborn than courage, the refusal to keep shrinking. Stay close to me, she said. A heavy-set man in a company polo shirt explained the rules. Each unit opens. 2 minutes to look, no entering, no touching. Then bidding starts, cash only. 48 hours to clear your unit completely. The first 3 units went fast and high. Stacked furniture, garment bags, exercise equipment. The recognizable shapes of middle-class lives interrupted. Bids climbed to 700, 800, 950. Corinne watched in silence, her hands in her pockets, learning the rhythms of how these people worked. Who bid early to establish dominance? Who waited and sniped at the end? Who bluffed? By the 4th unit, she was calculating odds she couldn't afford to take. Then came Unit 34. The corrugated door rolled up with the screech of rusty tracks. Several bidders actually laughed. The space was small, 5 by 10, and it appeared to hold little more than ruin. Water-damaged boxes slumped against the left wall. A dresser with a cracked mirror, rolled carpets, a wooden trunk shoved against the back wall. The smell was stale air and damp cardboard and forgotten time. Looks like someone's spring cleaning from 10 years ago, muttered a thick-necked man standing near Corinne. His name badge read Clyde Hargrove. He had the loud confidence of a man who had never been ignored in his life. But Corinne was looking, really looking, not at what was damaged, but at the pattern of the damage. The water stains affected only the boxes on the left side. The rolled carpets showed no mold. The trunk at the back was dry, positioned on a slight elevation of stacked boards that kept it above the waterline. This wasn't random deterioration. Someone had arranged this unit so that certain things would survive and others would serve as camouflage. Someone had made the valuable things look worthless on purpose. You just have to know where to look. Starting bid for unit $34.25, the auctioneer called, already sounding bored. Half the crowd drifted toward the next unit. Clyde shook his head and turned away. 30 someone called from the back, sounding uncertain. Corinne's heart hammered against her ribs. 45, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Clyde glanced back, surprised. The lady wants the garbage. All yours. Going once at 45, the auctioneer said. Going twice. 47. Corinne corrected. Because 47 was everything she had, and she wanted to keep the exact number honest. As if precision could make a reckless act feel like a plan. Sold. To the lady for $47. As Corinne filled out the paperwork and counted out bills that represented every dollar between her son and hunger, a thin woman with nervous hands approached from the direction of the office. She wore a Valley View polo shirt, and her name tag read, Della Fay. Be careful, Della said, her voice barely above a whisper. Corinne looked up. Excuse me. Sometimes units like this ones that look like nothing. They're not abandoned by accident. Della glanced over her shoulder, quick and bird-like. Sometimes people hide things by making them look not worth finding. Before Corinne could respond, Della was already walking away. Her thin shoulders hunched, as if against a wind no one else could feel. Corinne stood there holding a padlock key and a receipt for Unit 34, watching the woman disappear around a corner. The warning settled into her skin like a chill. That evening, they parked behind Mrs. Odom's shop in their usual spot. The live oaks threw long shadows across the van as the sun dropped behind the roofline of the Baptist church across the street. Savannah softened at this hour, its edges blurred by golden light and the hum of cicadas tuning up for the night. Corinne and Ezra had spent the afternoon hauling what they could from Unit 34. The silver flatware wrapped in tarnished cloth, the hardcover books that had been protected from water, several jewelry boxes containing what appeared to be costume pieces, and the trunk which was locked and heavy and had taken both of them to wrestle into the back of the van. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be. Damaged goods, soggy papers, the ordinary debris of an ordinary life interrupted. But the things that had been protected, the things placed above the waterline, positioned on those careful stacks of boards, those told a different story. The trunk sat between them now, its brass fittings green with age, its lock rusted but solid. "Can you open it?" Ezra asked. He sat cross-legged on the van floor, sorting through the books they had salvaged. "Mom, this one is from 1932, first edition." "Probably not, but hold on to it." Corinne examined the lock. She would need a pry bar. $5 at the hardware store on Waters Avenue. $5 she didn't have until she sold the silver, which she couldn't do until Abe's shop opened in the morning. But Abe had given her 65 for the brooch when she had asked for 70. He had been firm at 65. Yet when she counted the bills later, there were 7 tens and a 5. $70. He had given her the full asking price and let her believe she was compromising. She used $3.40 of that kindness on a pry bar. The lock resisted for 20 minutes. Corinne worked it with the patience of someone who understood that most things worth opening don't open easily. Ezra held the flashlight and offered encouragement, and occasionally handed her the wrong tool with absolute confidence that it was the right one. Then the mechanism gave way with a sound like a bone cracking. The lid came free. Inside, everything was orderly. Deliberately, carefully, lovingly orderly. Jewelry boxes nested in cloth. Sealed envelopes tied with ribbon that had once been blue and was now the color of dust. A folded American flag in a triangular display case. Newspaper clippings pressed between sheets of clear plastic. And on top of everything, as if placed there, last a gold locket on a chain so fine it looked like it might dissolve between Corinne's fingers. She opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, late 20s maybe, dark hair parted on the side, a smile that was not quite a smile but something more private, as if she were amused by a joke she hadn't told yet. On the back of the locket, engraved in script so small, Corinne had to hold it under the flashlight, to Vivienne. All my love. Corinne set the locket down gently and picked up one of the newspaper clippings. The plastic sleeve had kept it pristine. The headline read, "Trent Estate Valuation Exceeds Expectations." The article, dated 1985, described the art collection of Malcolm Trent, one of Savannah's most distinguished dealers and collectors. Impressionist paintings, pre-Columbian artifacts, a private gallery on Monterey Square that had been the envy of the Southern art world for 2 decades. "Mom, look at this." Ezra held up a Polaroid photograph, yellowed at the edges. A young woman, the same woman from the locket, standing beside an older man in front of a large painting. They were both smiling. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Malcolm and I with the Monet, 1982. The happiest birthday." Corinne's hands went still. Ezra found the next piece. A velvet pouch, small and heavy. He opened it and a key fell into his palm. Not a door key. An ornate key with a numbered metal tag attached by a thin chain. Box 891. "A safe deposit box," Corinne whispered. And then she found the page. Torn from a diary preserved separately from everything else, folded into a sealed envelope marked "Urgent" in red ink that had faded to the color of old blood. She unfolded it and read aloud, her voice barely steady. "If anything happens to me, the proof is secured. Box 891 contains everything needed to expose the truth. Malcolm trusted me with his legacy, not Garrett. G has always resented this and will do anything to claim what he believes is his. I've arranged a failsafe. This unit is paid for 30 years under a name Garrett would never think to look for. If I cannot retrieve these items myself, I pray someone worthy finds them." It was signed with 2 letters, VA, dated August 17th, 1984. Silence filled the van. The kind of silence that has weight and texture, that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own pulse. "Who is she?" Ezra asked. Corinne looked at the locket photograph again. The intelligent eyes, the private smile. A woman who had known she was in danger and had spent her final free days building an elaborate insurance policy out of tarnished silver and hidden keys and a storage unit designed to look like garbage. I don't know yet, but I think she needs someone to tell her story. She placed everything back in the trunk, with the care of an archivist handling primary sources. Then she sat back against the wall of the van, the locket still warm in her closed fist, and looked at Ezra, who had fallen asleep with his chest set open on his lap. A problem half solved, his breathing steady. Now the wheeze gone quiet for the night. Outside, the Savannah dark pressed close thick with the smell of jasmine and the sound of tree frogs calling from the churchyard. Somewhere in this city, a family named Trent still held a collection worth millions. Somewhere in the past, a woman named Vivienne had vanished after writing a warning that no one had read for 40 years. And somewhere between those 2 truths, Corinne Bellamy sat in a van with her sleeping son and a dead woman's secrets, and the first fragile spark of something she had not allowed herself to feel in 14 months. Not hope exactly, something more dangerous than hope. The belief that she had found something that mattered, that her eyes, trained by years of handling other people's beautiful things, had seen what everyone else had dismissed. That the same world which had taken her apartment, her stability, her sense of safety, had just handed her a locked door and trusted her to find the key. But belief, Corinne was learning, is a kind of currency, and like all currency, it costs something to spend. She did not yet know how much this one would cost her. In the deep quiet of the van just before sleep pulled her under, she could almost hear a voice. Not her own, younger, steadier. The voice of a woman writing letters she hoped would never need to be read. I know I am walking a tightrope, but Malcolm believed in me. I will not betray that trust. The words hung in the dark like smoke. Then sleep came, and the van was still, and the live oaks stood their ancient watch, and the city of Savannah kept its secrets the way it always had, patiently, until someone with the right eyes came looking. The Bull Street branch of the Savannah Public Library opened at 9, and Corinne was waiting on the steps at 8:47, with Ezra beside her, the chess set in his backpack, and a list of names written in careful block letters on the back of a gas station receipt. Malcolm Trent, Vivienne Ashford, Garrett Trent, Savannah Art Collection, 1983. The library was their cathedral. It had always been. Free internet, clean restrooms, air conditioning that worked, and librarians who never once looked at Ezra's worn shoes or Corinne's mended blouse and decided they didn't belong. On the hardest days, the ones when the van felt like a coffin and the future felt like a wall, this building had kept them human. They settled at adjacent computer terminals in the reference section. Ezra typed with the speed of a child who had taught himself to research the way other children taught themselves video games out of necessity and hunger, and the particular stubbornness of a mind that refused to stop asking questions. Within an hour, the shape of a dead man's life filled their screens. Malcolm Trent had been one of Savannah's most celebrated art dealers from 1961 until his death in November 1983. His gallery on Monterey Square had specialized in Impressionist works and had attracted collectors from New York, London, and Tokyo. His personal collection, kept separately from the gallery inventory, had been valued at over $4 million at the time of his death. Adjusted for today's market, the figure would be closer to 20 million. After Malcolm died, the entire estate, gallery, and personal collection alike had passed to his nephew and business partner, Garrett Trent. The Savannah Morning News had described the inheritance as unexpected, noting that Malcolm had been known to express reservations about his nephew's purely commercial approach to art. Mom. Ezra had pulled up an archived society page from 1982. A photograph showed Malcolm Trent at a gallery opening, silver-haired and elegant, holding a glass of champagne. Beside him stood a young woman in a dark dress, her face turned slightly toward his, caught in the middle of a laugh. The caption identified her as Vivienne Ashford, personal assistant. That's her. Corinne murmured. The Locket photograph brought to life in full motion. Further searching confirmed what the diary page had implied. Vivienne Ashford had vanished in September of 1984, almost exactly a year after Malcolm's death. The disappearance had drawn some press coverage at the time. Garrett Trent was quoted in the Savannah Morning News expressing concern that Miss Ashford had been deeply affected by his uncle's passing and suggesting she may have harmed herself. But one article told a different story. Buried deep in the search results published in the now-defunct Savannah Examiner by a journalist named Harriet Dunn, it raised questions about the timing of Vivienne's disappearance just days before a scheduled audit of the gallery's financial records. An anonymous source suggested Vivienne had discovered discrepancies in the accounts after Malcolm's death. The article ended with a line that landed in Corinne's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Miss Ashford's disappearance may have silenced her voice, but the questions surrounding the Trent estate have not gone silent with her. Can we find this Harriet Dunn? Ezra asked. She's still writing. Corinne scribbled down the contact information from a blog about Savannah history and politics. She writes about the city, has for decades. Ezra's breathing had changed. The whistle was back, thin and persistent, threading through each exhale like a wire pulled too tight. He reached for his inhaler without being told. 2 puffs. Hold. Release. I'm fine, Mom. She packed sandwiches and apples and took him to the courtyard, where the air moved freely, and the fountain made a sound like someone slowly pouring a glass of water that never emptied. She composed the email on her phone while Ezra ate. She kept it simple because she had learned that simple was what people trusted, and trust was all she had to offer. Miss Dunn, I recently found items belonging to Vivienne Ashford. Your article from 1984 is the only one I've seen that questioned the official story of her disappearance. I believe I have evidence that supports your suspicions. Would you be willing to meet? She signed it. Corinne and sent it from the temporary email address she had created at the library 6 months ago, back when she still had enough optimism to apply for cleaning jobs online. The reply came in 11 minutes. Corinne read it twice because the speed of it seemed almost reckless, intrigued. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Clary's Cafe on Abercorn. I'll be the one with the red reading glasses and no patience for small talk. Harriet. Corinne left Ezra with Mrs. Odom the next morning. He protested, but she was firm. Mrs. Odom taught him how to check tire pressure and told him about the Buick Skylark she had restored in 1978. And by the time Corinne pulled out of the lot, he was elbow deep in an engine compartment and asking questions Mrs. Odom actually had to think about before answering. Harriet Dunn sat at a corner table with a notebook open before her, a pen behind her ear and a mug of coffee that had clearly been refilled more than once. She was 68, lean with cropped silver hair, and the posture of a woman who had spent her entire career leaning forward into conversations other people wanted to lean away from. You're Corinne. Yes, ma'am. Sit. Coffee's decent here. I ordered you a cup because I didn't want to waste the first 5 minutes on menus. Corinne sat grateful and slightly overwhelmed and told her everything. The storage auction, the trunk, the locket, the diary page, the safe deposit key. She showed Harriet the photographs on her phone, watching the older woman's face change the way weather changes on the coast fast and without apology. When Corinne mentioned Box 891, Harriet set her coffee down and didn't pick it up again. First National, she murmured. That was Malcolm's bank, absorbed by Southern Heritage Trust about 15 years ago. If the box still exists, it would be at their downtown branch. Can we access it? Not without documentation proving legal authority, but I have a contact there. Former source now in management. I can at least confirm whether the box exists and who's accessed it. Harriet studied Corinne with the measuring gaze of someone who had spent 40 years sorting truth from performance. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? The question deserved a real answer, and Corinne gave it the only way she knew how, directly. My son and I live in our van. He has asthma that requires medication I can barely afford. If there's something valuable in what I found, I need the money. I won't pretend otherwise, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because your article was the only one that treated Vivienne Ashford like a person instead of a footnote. She mattered to someone. Maybe she can still matter now. Harriet was quiet for a long time. Then she closed her notebook and placed both hands flat on the table, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. The professional distance was gone. What remained was something older and more personal. I've carried that story for 40 years, Garrett. Trent is still running what's left of the gallery, still hosting charity galas, still collecting awards for preserving his uncle's vision. And I have always believed he stole everything, the art, the legacy, and possibly a young woman's life. She leaned across the table. I want to help you, but you need to understand what you're walking into. The Trents have connections throughout this city, legal, political, social. If Garrett learns what you found, he will come after it, and after you. The drive back to Mrs. Odom's took 12 minutes. Corinne noticed the white sedan at minute 3. It appeared in her rearview mirror as she turned off Abercorn onto 37th Street. A late-model Nissan spotless tinted windows maintaining a distance of about 4 car lengths. She changed lanes. The sedan changed lanes. She turned right on Habersham for no reason. The sedan turned right on Habersham for no reason. Corinne's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She drove past Mrs. Odom's without stopping. Circled 2 blocks, pulled into the Kroger parking lot on Victory Drive, and wedged the van between a delivery truck and a dumpster. She sat with the engine off and watched the mirror until her hands stopped shaking. The sedan drifted past the lot entrance. Slow, deliberate. Then it was gone. That night, she parked in a different spot. A 24-hour Walmart lot where other vehicles sat overnight and no one asked questions. She did not tell Ezra about the car. She told him about Harriet Dunn and her 40 years of chasing the truth, and the way her eyes had sharpened when Corinne mentioned the safe deposit key. So she's like a detective, Ezra said. Something like that. Are we going to solve the mystery we're going to try? He fell asleep with the chess set open, a complex endgame arranged on the magnetic board, and Corinne lay in the dark listening to his breathing and thinking about white sedans and the weight of other people's secrets. 2 days later, Harriet called with news that landed like a fist. Box 891 still exists at Southern Heritage Trust. It was registered to Vivienne Ashford and paid up for 50 years in advance. An extraordinary arrangement grandfathered in when First National was acquired. But Corinne listened to me carefully. It's been accessed. 3 days after you bought the storage unit. Someone walked in with power of attorney for the Trent estate and emptied it. The name on the access log was Richard Falk, senior partner at Greystone Legal. Client list including the Trent Gallery and Foundation. They knew, Corinne said. Almost immediately, someone told them. Harriet's voice carried the controlled fury of a journalist who has just confirmed a theory she hoped was wrong. That woman at the storage facility, Della, she didn't warn you out of kindness. She was fishing, finding out what you knew so she could report back. The betrayal settled into Corinne slowly, the way cold water soaks through fabric. Della's nervous eyes, her whispered warning, the performance of concern from a woman who had already picked up her phone. That same afternoon, Corinne's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The items from Unit 34 have significant value. $5,000 cash, no questions asked. Reply if interested. She showed Harriet at their next meeting, this time at Harriet's apartment in Ardsley Park. A 2-bedroom buried under decades of files and clippings, and the accumulated evidence of a life spent asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. They're lowballing, which means they're worried. Harriet said, "Don't respond yet. Let them sweat." Before Corinne could reply, her phone rang. Mrs. Odom's number. "Someone came looking for you this morning. A man in an expensive suit. Said he was from a law firm, something about items you'd found that belonged to his client. Left a card, Richard Falk, attorney at law." Mrs. Odom's voice dropped to a register Corinne had never heard from her before. Tight, protective. He asked about Ezra by name, Corinne. Asked about the boy's schooling, his living situation. I told him I barely knew you, but he left his card and said there would be consequences if you didn't contact him. Used words like custodial fitness and mandatory reporting. I didn't like him. Don't bring Ezra back here until this is settled. I don't trust what that man might do. Corinne hung up and sat very still in Harriet's cluttered living room, her hands folded in her lap, her pulse loud in her ears. Custodial fitness. The phrase opened a trapdoor beneath her feet, and she could feel herself falling through it into the place she visited in her worst nightmares. The place where someone in a suit decided she wasn't enough. Where Ezra was led away from her by strangers who had clean houses and steady incomes, and no idea that the boy they were taking needed his chess set within arm's reach to fall asleep. He's threatening to call Child Protective Services, she said. It's a pressure tactic, Harriet replied, but her eyes were worried. 3 days later, it stopped being a tactic. The woman from the Department of Family and Children's Services arrived at the Walmart parking lot at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. She was a young professional carrying a clipboard, and she did not look unkind. Her name was Janet, and she explained that an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding the welfare of a minor child living in a vehicle. Corinne stood in the parking lot beside the van with its curtained windows and its slow oil leak and its carefully organized interior, where every possession had a place because when you live in 400 square feet, disorder is a luxury you cannot afford. Ezra sat inside on the folded bed, his homework spread before him, his inhaler on the seat beside him, his eyes wide and terrified in a way Corinne had never seen before. Not the wide eyes of a child who had found a mystery in a trunk, not the bright eyes of a boy solving chess problems or reading about art thieves. These were the eyes of a child who understood with the cruel clarity that poverty forces on children far too young, that the world had the power to take him away from the only person who had never let him down. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about Ezra's living situation, education, nutrition, and medical care. This is a standard welfare check. You're not being charged with anything. The questions took 40 minutes. Corinne answered every one. She showed Janet the homeschool curriculum she had downloaded from the library, the log of Ezra's reading 3 grade levels above his age, the free clinic records documenting his asthma management, the food journal she kept to make sure he ate enough protein. She showed her the van with its clean bedding and its organized storage, and the plastic bin where Ezra's books were kept dry, and the hook where his jacket hung, and the shelf where his chess set lived. And through all of it, Ezra sat perfectly still with his hands in his lap, and did not speak because he had learned something that morning that no 10-year-old should have to learn. That being loved is not the same as being safe, and that the people with the power to separate you from your mother can arrive on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and a calm voice and turn your whole world into a question mark. Janet finished her notes. She looked at Ezra, then at Corinne, and something in her expression softened past the professional boundary. Miss Bellamy, based on my assessment, Ezra is well-nourished, educated, and clearly bonded with you. Housing instability alone is not grounds for removal, and I see no evidence of neglect. I'm going to close this complaint as unfounded. She paused. I will note that the complaint appeared to originate from a legal office rather than a concerned citizen. That's unusual. If you're being harassed, you should know that weaponizing CPS reports is itself a form of misconduct. Janet left. Corinne closed the van door. And then, for the first time since they had lost the apartment 14 months ago, she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She simply sat down on the van floor and pressed her hands against her face and let the tears come without sound, the way she had learned to cry so that Ezra wouldn't hear her at night. But Ezra heard her now. He climbed down from the bed and put his arms around her neck and held on with a grip that was fiercer than any 10-year-old's grip should be. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom. They can't take me. You're the best mom in the world and I'm not going anywhere." She held him until the shaking stopped. Then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and looked at her son and made a decision that felt less like courage and more like a door slamming shut behind her, sealing off the option of retreat. "We're not giving up. We're not giving back what we found." Vivienne Ashford hid her truth in a unit full of trash because she trusted that someone would come along who could see what others couldn't. I'm not going to prove her wrong. Harriet arranged the meeting with Dr. Eloise Whitfield for that afternoon. She lived in a ground-floor apartment in Ardsley Park, a space filled with medical journals, framed photographs, and art that was quietly, confidently modern. She was 87 years old. She moved slowly, but her eyes moved fast. "Vivienne would have liked you," Dr. Whitfield said after studying Corinne for a long moment. "You have the same quality she did, the same way of noticing. That girl could walk into a room full of paintings and tell you which one had a soul. Not everyone can do that." She poured tea from a pot that looked older than the building and told them the story that had been locked inside her for 4 decades. How Vivienne had arrived at the gallery in 1978, 26, and brilliant and too poor to finish her degree. How Malcolm had recognized in her something he had never found in Garrett, the ability to see art as more than inventory. How 2 months before his death, Malcolm had discovered Garrett's embezzlement and had changed his will, leaving the personal collection to Vivienne. "I witnessed the signing," Dr. Whitfield said, along with Nathaniel Green, Malcolm's accountant. "It was legal. It was proper. It was Malcolm's clear and sober wish." And after he died, Garrett produced an earlier will, left everything to him. Vivienne contested it quietly. Then she vanished. Dr. Whitfield reached into a drawer and withdrew an envelope yellowed with age but carefully preserved. "She gave me this for safekeeping, to be opened only if something happened to her. When she disappeared, I nearly came forward. Then Richard Falk paid me a visit, threatened my license, my reputation. I was 60 years old and afraid, and I have regretted my silence every day since." She placed the envelope in Corinne's hands. "I'm 87. My conscience will not wait any longer." The letter inside was dated September 2nd, 1984. Vivienne's handwriting was neat and unhurried, the penmanship of a woman who understood that what she was writing might one day be evidence. "If you are reading this, something has happened to me. The proof is in multiple places. Garrett would never look in plain sight among what he considers worthless. I have hidden the truth where only careful eyes will find it." Corinne read the line twice and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a mantle she had not asked for, but could not refuse. The next morning, Harriet convinced Valley View Storage to hold the remaining contents of Unit 34 for 24 hours. They drove out in Harriet's car because the van's oil light had come on and Corinne couldn't afford the repair. The unit was nearly empty now. The dresser with its cracked mirror, a small writing desk with a broken leg tilted against the back wall, 3 boxes of water-damaged papers. It was the desk that caught Corinne's eye. The damage was wrong. A broken leg, yes, but the break was clean, almost surgical. The water stains on the surface followed a pattern that didn't match the water damage on the surrounding boxes. This desk had been made to look broken, made to look like something you would walk past without a second thought. The single drawer was swollen shut from moisture. Harriet held the desk steady while Corinne worked it open. Inside old stationery, blank, unremarkable. But the drawer was too shallow. Corinne measured it with her palm, then ran her fingers along the outside of the desk. 3 inches of space unaccounted for. False bottom. Harriet whispered, They found the seam at the back of the drawer, a hairline crack invisible unless you were pressing your fingertips along every surface feeling for the thing that didn't belong. When Corinne pushed a panel lifted with a soft click, and beneath it lay a leather-bound book no larger than a hymnal. The initials VA were embossed in gold on the cover. Two small locks held it shut. Ezra, who had been examining the broken boxes with the systematic attention of a boy who had read too many detective novels, looked up from across the unit. "Two locks," he said, "like the key I found in the camera." Corinne reached into her pocket and produced the small ornate key that Ezra had discovered inside the Polaroid camera days ago. The second key lay beside the book in the hidden compartment, as if Vivienne had wanted whoever found this place to have one key but had hidden the other elsewhere, a final test of patience and perception. Corinne inserted both keys, turned them simultaneously. The binding clicked open. Inside was not a diary but a weapon. Page after page of meticulous records, dates of artwork sales, prices paid, discrepancies between what the gallery reported and what actually changed hands. Names of private collectors in Geneva and Hong Kong who had purchased pieces from Malcolm's personal collection pieces that Garrett had no right to sell, with forged signatures on the transfer documents. The final pages held photographs, clear, damning photographs of paperwork showing Garrett's forgeries alongside Malcolm's authentic signature for comparison. Vivienne had built her case the way an architect builds a cathedral, one carefully placed stone at a time, designed to stand long after she was gone. Harriet held the ledger with hands that trembled for the first time since Corinne had known her. "This is everything: fraud, forgery, tax evasion, across 4 decades, and motive." Corinne's voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in days. Motive for making sure Vivienne Ashford never told anyone what she knew. They drove back in silence. Ezra sat in the back seat with the ledger in his lap, guarding it with the same gravity he gave his chess set. At a red light on Deren, he spoke. "Mom, she hid things the way you see things, in places nobody else would look." Corinne met his eyes in the mirror, those sharp, careful, undeceived eyes. "You just have to know where to look," he said. At the hotel that evening, while Harriet made calls to the attorney she trusted, and Ezra drew in his notebook, Corinne's phone chimed. She knew before she read it what the tone would be. "Final warning, $10,000. Meet at Greystone Legal Offices tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring all items from the storage unit. No police, no journalists. After this legal action begins, your custody situation will be revisited." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at the notebook in Ezra's hands. He had drawn a new version of his dream house. This one had a sign above the front door, "Mom's Gallery," and in the doorway a stick figure with his name above it, welcoming visitors with open arms. Corinne set down the phone. She picked up the ledger, and she began very carefully to photograph every single page. Margot Castillo read the ledger twice before she said a word. She turned each page with the deliberate care of a woman who understood that what she held in her hands was not paper and ink, but the compressed weight of 40 years of silence. When she finished, she closed the cover, aligned it precisely with the edge of her desk, and looked at Corinne. "This is enough." Margot was 44, small-framed, with dark hair pulled back from a face that gave nothing away for free. Her office on Broughton Street was spare and clean. No family photographs, no inspirational quotes on the walls. Just law books, a single orchid on the windowsill, and a framed quote from Thurgood Marshall that Corinne couldn't read from where she sat, but that Margot clearly could from hers. Enough for what exactly, Corinne asked. Enough to file a civil suit challenging Garrett-Trent's ownership of the remaining collection. Enough for a temporary injunction preventing him from selling or transferring any assets. And enough combined with Dr. Whitfield's testimony and Vivienne's letter to make the district attorney's office very interested in having a conversation with Mr. Trent about fraud, forgery, and the suspicious disappearance of a 26-year-old woman. Margot opened a legal pad and began writing. The emergency injunction goes first. Garrett has a major exhibition opening in 3 weeks. The Legacy Collection. He's billing it as the crown jewel of his career. The timing gives us extraordinary leverage, and the cost Corinne had learned to ask about cost first, because people who couldn't afford things had no business pretending otherwise. Margot set her pen down. I take cases like this pro bono, Miss Bellamy, not as charity, as investment. If we prevail, and I believe we will, standard legal fees come from the recovery. If we don't prevail, you owe me nothing. She paused. But I should be honest with you. This will get harder before it gets easier. Garrett Trent has resources, connections, and a 40-year head start on burying the truth. I've been living in a van for 14 months, Corinne said. I know what harder looks like. The filing landed like a grenade in Savannah's art community. Within 48 hours, 2 art industry publications had run stories questioning the provenance of pieces scheduled for the Legacy exhibition. The Savannah Morning News called Garrett's office for comment and received a statement from Richard Falk describing the lawsuit as baseless and defamatory. The desperate fabrication of opportunists seeking to exploit a respected family's generosity. But the injunction held. Judge Patricia Rawlings found sufficient cause for the case to proceed and issued a temporary order preventing any sale or transfer of artwork from Malcolm Trent's original collection. Discovery would commence immediately. Financial records spanning 4 decades were ordered to be produced within 30 days. Falk's threatening texts stopped the morning the injunction was granted. The silence was louder than any message had been. Then Della Fay called. Corinne almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar numbers had brought nothing but threats for the past 2 weeks. But something made her pick up, perhaps the same instinct that had made her bid on a unit full of damaged boxes when everyone else had walked away. Please don't hang up. Della's voice was stripped of the nervous performance Corinne remembered from the storage facility. What remained underneath was raw and tired and afraid. I need to tell you something. You've told Garrett enough already. I know what I did. He's been paying me $200 a month for 11 years to watch that unit. Report any activity. I didn't know what was in it. Didn't want to know. $200 is $200 when you are raising a daughter alone on 12 an hour. Corinne said nothing. She understood the math of that sentence better than Della could possibly realize. But then I saw what he did to you, sending that lawyer after your boy, calling CPS on a mother who's doing everything right with nothing. Della's breathing was uneven, ragged at the edges. I have a daughter, Miss Bellamy. She's 14. If someone did that to me, used my child as a weapon, I would burn their house to the ground. What do you want, Della? To give you something. Falk sends me instructions by email. Always has. Delete after reading, he says. But I never delete anything. I have 11 years of messages telling me to monitor Unit 34, report any inquiries, and alert him immediately if anyone shows interest. 11 years of proof that Garrett Trent knew exactly where Vivienne Ashford hid her evidence and chose to leave it buried rather than risk drawing attention to it. The emails arrived in Margot's inbox that evening. 137 messages spanning over a decade, each one a small confession. Monitor and report. Do not engage. Do not attract attention. standard quarterly payment enclosed. They painted a portrait of a man who had known for years that his crime had a paper trail sitting in a storage unit on Duran Avenue, and had calculated that leaving it undisturbed was safer than retrieving it. Until Corinne Bellamy had walked in with $47 and an eye that saw what his money had paid to keep hidden. Margot added the emails to their filing. Harriet began preparing a feature article held in reserve like a weapon in a glass case. And Corinne waited, because waiting was something she had become very good at, though she had never expected it to become a skill with legal applications. The preliminary hearing took place on a Thursday morning in a courtroom that smelled of wood polish and old paper, and the particular stillness of places where people's lives are weighed and measured by strangers. Corinne wore the same black pants and navy blouse she had worn to meet Harriet the best she had, and she sat very straight in her chair and did not look away when Garrett Trent entered the room. He was thinner than she had expected. 73 years old, immaculate in a gray suit that probably cost more than her van, with the careful posture of a man holding himself together by force of will. His eyes found Corinne and Ezra, who sat beside her with his hands folded in his lap and his chest set in his backpack because he went nowhere without it. Garrett's expression flickered, not anger. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man seeing the end of a road he had been walking for 40 years. Judge Rawlings heard arguments from both sides, asked precise questions, and ruled that the case would proceed to full discovery. The injunction stood. The exhibition could open, but no artwork could be sold or transferred pending resolution. Outside the courthouse, the Savannah air was warm and thick with the smell of Confederate jasmine blooming along the wrought iron fences. Margot was already on her phone discussing forensic accounting. Harriet was taking notes. And then Falk appeared at Corinne's elbow, gray-suited and gray-faced, speaking in the low tones of a man delivering a message he didn't fully endorse. "Mr. Trent would like to speak with you, privately." "No." "With your attorney present, then, this afternoon." "His offices." Corinne looked at Margot, who raised an eyebrow and nodded once. Garrett Trent's office occupied the second floor of a townhouse on Bull Street, its walls lined with paintings that caught the afternoon light and held it the way a cupped hand holds water. Corinne recognized the style from Ezra's catalogue. Impressionist, French. The brushwork loose and luminous, every canvas a window into a world made of color and feeling rather than line and fact. These were Malcolm's, she said, not a question. Garrett sat behind a mahogany desk that dwarfed him. Without Falk beside him, without the courtroom formality, he looked diminished. Not small exactly, but reduced like a painting that had been cleaned of its varnish and revealed to be less vivid than everyone remembered. "My uncle bought that Renoir in 1968, he said, nodding toward a canvas of a woman reading in a garden. "Paid $12,000. It's worth $3 million now. He always said the painting wasn't valuable because of the price. It was valuable because the woman in it was actually seeing the book in her hands. Most portraits of readers, the subject is posing. This one is reading." He turned to Corinne. "You see things, don't you, Miss Bellamy? The way my uncle did. The way she did." Vivienne, Corinne said. Her name was Vivienne. Garrett closed his eyes briefly, as though the name itself carried a weight he had spent 40 years trying not to feel. "Yes, Vivienne." He pressed his fingertips together. "I spent 4 decades avoiding her name. A small erasure. One of many. She was the first person besides my uncle who could walk into a room of paintings and tell you which one was alive and which one was merely well executed. I resented her for that. I have a degree in art history from Yale, and a 26-year-old without a diploma could see things I couldn't. Corinne waited. Margot sat beside her still and watchful. I stole from the gallery before my uncle died. He discovered it, changed his will to punish me and to protect the collection by leaving it to someone who loved it the way he did. After he died, I produced the earlier will. Vivienne challenged it. She had evidence of the embezzlement, the forged signatures, the offshore sales. She was going to expose everything. His voice had the flat quality of a man reading his own confession from a page he had written long ago and memorized without meaning to. I had Falk hire someone to follow her, intimidate her, recover her evidence. The night of September 15th, 1984, she came to this office, stood right where you're standing, told me she knew about the surveillance, that someone had broken into her apartment. She was furious and frightened and absolutely unbreakable. She said she would go to the police, the press, the courts, everything. What did you do? I threatened her, explicitly. Said things that I have heard in my sleep every night for 40 years. She left. 3 days later, she was gone. Her apartment cleared out, no trace. He met Corinne's eyes. I did not harm her. I have done terrible things, but I did not do that. Whatever happened to Vivienne Ashford after she walked out of this office, it was not at my hand. But I created the conditions that made her disappearance possible. I made her afraid. I made her alone. And then I spent 40 years pretending she had never existed. The room was very quiet. The Renoir glowed on the wall, its painted woman still reading her painted book, oblivious to the confessions being made in her presence. Your attorney has offered $2 million for my silence, Corinne said. I'm not here for your money, Mr. Trent. Then what? A full public acknowledgement that Vivienne Ashford was Malcolm's chosen heir. Donation of the remaining collection to the Telfair Museum, housed as the Ashford-Trent collection. Your complete cooperation with the police investigation into Vivienne's disappearance. She held his gaze, and a trustee position for me overseeing the collection's preservation. With fair compensation. That's everything, he said quietly. My entire life's work. It was never yours. The silence stretched. On the wall, the Renoir woman turned a page that would never finish turning. And if I agree, Margot will advise the district attorney that you cooperated fully. We won't pursue criminal charges beyond what's legally required. And your name goes on the collection too, not as an owner, as the man who finally did the right thing. Garrett Trent looked at the paintings on his walls, one by one, as if saying goodbye to each of them individually. Then he looked at Corinne, and she saw in his face something she had not expected to find there. Relief. The exhausted relief of a man setting down a weight he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it was not part of his body. You'll have my answer by morning, he said. It came at 7:42 a.m. A single word from Falk's office forwarded through Margot. Yes, the Legacy exhibition opened 6 weeks later under a new name. The brass plaque at the entrance to the Telfair Museum's newest wing read, The Ashford-Trent Collection, a Legacy Restored. Garrett Trent stood at the podium and spoke Vivienne Ashford's name into a microphone for the first time in 40 years, and the art world listened, and the city of Savannah absorbed the story the way it absorbed all stories slowly, with the patience of moss growing on old stone. Police reopened the missing persons case. The private investigator Garrett had hired, now in his 70s and living in Jacksonville, was interviewed. No resolution came, not yet, but the file remained active, and Vivienne's photograph appeared in the newspaper beside the word seeking rather than the word forgotten. Della Fay was not charged. Margot argued successfully that her cooperation had been instrumental, and the judge agreed. She sent Corinne a card with no return address, just 2 words: thank you. Dr. Whitfield attended the exhibition opening in a wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse and wearing a blue dress. She said she had been saving for an occasion that deserved it. She sat for a long time in front of the Renoir, the one of the woman reading, and said nothing. And Corinne did not interrupt her silence because some conversations happen between people and paintings and require no translation. On a warm evening 3 months after the settlement, Corinne stood on the small balcony of a 2-bedroom apartment on East Jones Street. It was not large. The kitchen was narrow and the bathroom had a crack in the ceiling tile that the landlord had promised to fix. But it had 2 bedrooms, and in the smaller one, Ezra had arranged his bookshelves exactly as he had drawn them in his notebook, floor to ceiling, filled with volumes that Harriet and Dr. Whitfield and Abe Moreno had contributed from their own collections, each one inscribed with a note. For the boy who sees what others miss. For Ezra, who reminds me why I became a journalist. For my young chess opponent who will surely beat me one day soon. Ezra came out onto the balcony. He was carrying his notebook open to the latest drawing. Not a dream house this time. The real apartment rendered in careful pencil, every detail exact. The bookshelves, the reading chair by the window, the small table where they ate dinner together, and above the front door a sign that read, "Home. Mom. Are you happy, very happy, baby?" He leaned against her, and she wrapped her arm around his shoulders, and they stood together, watching the light fade through the live oaks that lined the street. Spanish moss caught the last gold of the sun and held it glowing the way it had glowed over this city for centuries, patient and ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of the people who lived beneath it. Do you think Vivienne would be happy about her paintings, about the museum? Corinne thought of the Locket photograph, the intelligent eyes, the private smile. A woman who had hidden her truth in a place designed to look like nothing, and waited. I think she would. Her story is finally being told. Ezra closed his notebook. The evening air smelled of jasmine and warm stone, and the particular sweetness that Savannah exhaled at the end of every long day, as if the city itself were breathing out, releasing its secrets one by one into the gathering dark. Somewhere across town, in a museum that had not existed 6 months ago, a brass plaque bore a name that had been missing for 40 years. And on the wall behind it, a woman in a painting sat reading a book she would never finish, caught forever in the act of seeing something that mattered, truly seeing it the way only certain eyes can. Some things aren't lost. They're just waiting for the right pair of eyes. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell us what is something valuable that everyone else overlooked but you saw. We read every single one. And if you haven't already subscribed so you never miss a story, thank you for listening. Sleep well tonight.